The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
So two little fish are swimming down a river toward the bay. The big fish is coming back from the bay, and the big fish says to the little fish, "Nice water, boys." And the little fish swim on for a little longer, and one of them says to the other one, "What the heck is water?" I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about something that's so like gravity, we don't even notice it's there. And it's the whole teaching of karma, of cause and effect. There was a story of this man got to his car, it was parked in front of a Starbucks, and there was a note under the wiper blade, and he looked at the note and it said, I backed into your car and damaged the bumper. There are a number of people looking at me writing this note, thinking I'm going to give you my contact information. I'm not. There's something funny about that, but if you believe in karma, the woman who wrote that note has something coming back. Sooner and later in life, we take the position that we put others into. That's the way it seems to work. So I'd like to talk about this principle of as you sow, so shall you reap, and touch on four things that are an interesting angle on it, I think. The first is the importance of intention and how intention directly affects your karma or the outcome of your thoughts, speech, and action. The second is about your habits and how your habits ultimately create your destiny. And a little bit about short-term karma and long-term karma, and short-term intentions and long-term intentions. And if we have time, explore a little bit of how do you support your deepest intentions, which your deepest intentions are directly related to the life that you live, how you incline your mind through your life journey. So this law that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, it brings up a question that's been argued over millennia, is the question of fate. So if it's just causes and conditions, is your life fated? You have no control over it. And the Buddha was very clear on that's not true at all. You have a choice, you have influence in your life. And the first thing to reflect on is kind of the potency of clear intention. To be clear where you direct your mind, what you say yes to, what you say no to. So the truth is that you are the inheritor of your karma. All the cards you've been dealt, those are yours. And they have to do with your genetics, your family upbringing, the culture you grew up in, the age in which you grew up, our relatedness, that's all tied in to what you have to work with in your life. That sounds like bad news, but there's good news. And the other side of that is that you are the creator of your karma. That you have the capacity to direct your attention in different ways that will affect the outcome of your life. So meditation or mindfulness, it definitely influences attention, and that affects the outcome. Your intention affects attention, which affects the outcome. So my friend Michael Potts is going to be joining us next week. We're going to do the class together. Well, we've been best friends since we were 19. We were meditation buddies in college. And he's had a really amazing life, both as a meditator and practitioner, but also as a very successful businessman. sold a company and worked for the Rocky Mountain Institute for many years as their CEO. And so I've known him through the trajectory of his life. And when he did his first startup, we were camping in the mountains of Colorado, just having a blast. And he got a call from a board member once we got cell phone coverage saying, "We want you to be in Denver for a 2-hour meeting. We're all flying in to meet you at the airport and have a meeting with you about the future of your company." And he had been in some tussles with them. As you can imagine, it completely threw him overboard. He was angry, he was upset, he felt betrayed. He was really wanted to show these guys how they were wrong and his direction was right. So he rode all those waves, and where he ended up with was his intention. And as he sort of unwound his side of it, he became to appreciate these were guys he really admired who were putting their good faith into money to support him to create a business and create wealth for everyone. And he really admired them, and it was an honor to have them say yes. And he got back to all of that. And his intention when he went down from the mountains to the meeting was, I am going to love these guys. And I want to let them know how much I appreciate them and how much I really want to hear what they have to say. So I stayed up in the mountains, and he came back the next day. And I said, how was it? He goes, it was a love fest. We just fell in love with each other. And it was so sweet. And I love that story because it really demonstrates pretty clearly how intention directly affects outcome. If he had gone in combative, it would have been a very, very different outcome. So remembering intention, that is so, so important. The Dalai Lama once said, I know as I go through this life, I am going to make mistakes. But I can trust that my intention is pure. I really love that. And as I've reflected on my life, I trust my intention, even though I stumble and do some ridiculous things at times. So this question of free will is an interesting one. Here's a Buddhist scholar says, the Buddha defined karma as intention, whether the intention manifested in itself physically, vocally, or in mental form. It's the attention alone which has the moral character. He talked about how the great innovation in the Buddha's teachings was it completely overturned the caste system, which was the very fabric of that culture. Because what he was saying was, no one is bound. You have your karma, but no one is bound. The way you direct your attention can dramatically affect the outcome. Everyone has the capacity to reach happiness, freedom, insight, enlightenment, if you will. And it's one of the things I love about this particular form of practice, that it's a path of self-responsibility. It's a path of really honestly assessing the moment and how you're relating to it. To continually ask yourself with brutal honesty, is what I'm doing leading to the actions that I want to create? So what meditation does is it breaks the pattern. It breaks the habitual circular thinking. So every time you wake up and your mind is way, way far away, there's sort of this miracle of coming back. And that whole thought story spinning out, it's over. As soon as you're aware of it, it's over. And it has very dramatic effect on many, many levels. So our habits, along with our intentions, directly impact the outcome. Yesterday I was driving along and some guy in a black Mercedes SUV cut me off. And I got a glimpse of him, And I instantly went into thinking, nasty, revengeful thoughts. That's just sort of what my mind does when I'm in the combat zone of the highways here. So a little bit later, this person, they cut way in and they were way up ahead, and eventually they were like in the right-hand lane, and my lane was sort of catching up, and I was just thinking these really unpleasant thoughts toward this car in front of me. And eventually the traffic changed so that I passed the car and I looked over and it was a different car. It was a woman driving the car. And I thought, wow, there you go. Just a simple habitual thing. The immediate prejudice against anyone who drives a black Mercedes SUV. But it's the habit of that thinking that changes the outcome of my experience. When we begin to slow down and notice the habitual thoughts, we also notice the habitual beliefs, which leads to the habitual habits, which leads to our character and to our destiny. Deepak Chopra said, this was years ago, he said, if I look at your body today, I can tell you all about your habits of these last few years. And if you tell me your habits today, I can tell you about your body in future years. Isn't that cool? What you habitually do, you become. So it can be very, very helpful to stop and analyze your habits, your routines. Whatever you do repeatedly becomes reinforced. And we see this in the brain. The neurons that fire together wire together. So when you're in patterns, you're creating habits which reinforce the structure of your brain. And the good news is we have the capacity to kind of rewire things. We can actually watch the brain rewiring itself through this practice of self-observation without judgment. So it might be interesting just to do a little inventory. If you like, you can close your eyes. This will just be for a few moments. You might take a few moments and just think of your habitual routines, what you do in relationship to food, your relationship to your health, and maybe reflect on what you do for fun in your free time. Is there a sense of any habits or rituals you have that are pretty guaranteed to give you energy, to enliven you in some way? And do you have any habits or routines or rituals that deplete you in some way, that take energy away? Not only do our habits either give us energy or deplete us or perhaps are neutral, so do our habitual thoughts, our beliefs. But looking at habits can be an interesting view. So if you like, you can deepen your breath. You can let your eyes open. So looking at habits, looking at what gives you energy, what takes energy away, can be a really interesting inventory. And to see if there's some ways that you can shift your rituals that might give you more energy, give you more of a wholesome feeling inside. There's a fun exercise, if you're ever interested. I think I've mentioned it before. It's called the toleration list. You make a list and get quite a few pages because you're going to need it. And make a list of everything you're tolerating, like everything you're putting up with. And it's really interesting to walk through your house or your apartment and just from room to room, tick off all the stuff that just annoys you. You know, the screen door that won't slam, you know, that gross pillow over in the corner that you don't know what to do with. And you make a list. And I think when I first did my list, I had like 86 things on it. And I got inspired. And so for a weekend, I just was rabid going after this list. And I only knocked out like 20, but all these little things that were bugging me. And I could not believe how much energy it gave me. It's a really interesting experiment. And one actually had to do with the door that didn't close properly. I fixed it and it was like, oh my God, this feels so good. So as you do your inventory, just consider that. What are all your little tolerations? What are you putting up with? And what if you converted them in some way? So part of the practice too is about how you can incline your mind toward more wholesome states. Like, what are the ways that you can direct your attention that can shift you in some way? One of them, and perhaps one of the most powerful, is gratitude. That when you just pause and reflect on what you're grateful for in your life, you automatically begin to shift the mind into a receptive, open, wholesome state. So gratitude is a quality to cultivate. Another one is well-wishing, to be a well-wisher of all. That can be just a wonderful way to shift your internal experience. It's also helpful at times to seek forgiveness when that timing is right, to just reflect on those where you may feel something between you and feeling completely free or happy. And reflecting on forgiveness, again, is another way to cultivate a mind state that allows you to unwind. So, of course, we all have habits, and some of them are really entrenched. They're really, really deep. And that becomes another inquiry into itself, to look at the unmet need, to look at different strategies. And part of it is, one of the reflections, this could certainly be a whole separate talk, is to reflect on the karma of the habit. If you have a habit that's not really helpful, to reflect on the karma of it, to play it out, to let it completely play out to its end. And reflecting on that can be very, very helpful. There's a quality of wisdom that arises, like, oh, that's the end result of this. And to reflect on the karma of shifting that habit and to play that out, what would that be like? And what you find eventually, perhaps, is you begin to find yourself beginning to associate pain to not changing and associating more pleasure to changing into a more wholesome state. So that's just one little piece of reflecting on habits and how they can be transformed. So looking at the seeds of karma, looking at in your own inventory of what are you putting up with, what are your complaints about life, what are you grateful for, can be very, very helpful, because you can begin to see into your habits and your patterns, and those reflections can be helpful. There's a great line, I love this line. But before you criticize someone, you should walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you criticize them, you're a mile away. And you have their shoes. My grandfather was born in southern Illinois in a German-speaking family. His father had been wounded in the Civil War, and he was like the youngest of 8 children. His mother was trying to run this farm, with no money, kind of sold him to another farmer, and he lived in the barn, looking over the cows. That was the beginning of his life. He went on. It's just one of those stories of that generation, unbelievable. not speaking English. He put himself through school, he put himself through college, he put himself through getting his engineering degree. And at one point, he was in charge of all the power for the first tunnel under a river, overseeing all of that technology, and just an amazing life. But one of the things he did is he put money aside for my education, enough for me to go to 4 years of boarding school and through college. And I can't tell you how many times I've reflected on that generosity. He died when I was maybe 7 years old. So I never really got to know him, but here was this benefactor who set up this enough money for me to go through school. I feel a sense of immense gratitude toward that. And so much so that I'm inspired, as I don't have children, that I'm setting up a college fund for my 3 nieces who are inevitably going to go to school. And there's something about offering that just feels so good, just to have a sense of how the load I can take off them through the generosity that I received. So the consequences of intention and action are really quite amazing. And I can feel that coming through me, through this person I hardly knew as my grandfather. And it can be helpful to reflect on your long-term goals. What is it that you most want in the long run? So let's do a little reflection, just a little 2-minute reflection for you. This is kind of a classic way of looking back. You might deepen your breath. And imagine yourself, if you wish, 102 years old, sitting on your rocking chair. And you've got a blanket over your legs. And you're reflecting back on this life that you have lived. Over these next few minutes, just a minute or two, just reflect on what was most important, what you would like to leave behind. And if you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can let your eyes open, or feel free to remain with them closed. A practice like that helps to change the frame. And it helps to begin to enliven a sense of what's really most important, knowing that this whole life will fall away. So long-term intention can be very, very helpful. And the classic stories of, even just the story of the Buddha, who his intention was to be awake, to see clearly into the nature of reality. That was his intention. And his whole life journey, the different practices, the places he were drawn to, were serving that intention. There's a wonderful poem, I couldn't find it, but basically the punchline of the poem is your life feels like you are on a sailboat tacking between small islands, constantly adjusting. And then at the end of your life, you realize it was a straight line. So reflecting on long-term intention, as Shunryo Suzuki said, the most important thing is to know the most important thing. Having that is very powerful. But there's another practice which can be helpful, particularly when you explore the relationship between intention and karma, and that is creating short-term intentions. for this next person you're going to be with, what is your intention for that outcome? When you wake up in the middle of the, or in the beginning of the day, what are the 3 things that are the most important to get done? And sense how those questions shape the direction that your attention goes. I found that to be a helpful practice when I remember, which is not that often, but when I do, it's quite powerful. For any given segment, what's most important? How do I want to feel at the end of this? What would that feel like? As a way of attuning between intention and action. Actually, on my iPhone, I have a reminder that comes up about 4 times a day to sort of remind me. And I'll actually pause and oftentimes write down my intention for this next period. It's an interesting exercise. So intentions can be short-term and they can be long-term. And karma, of course, is short-term and long-term. There's a reaction to everything you do. If you smoke just 1 cigarette, you'll feel a certain physiological effect. If you smoke cigarettes for 40 years, there will be a long-term accumulation from that habitual activity. So then the question becomes, how do you align your intention? We have perhaps our life intention, but then your lifestyle. How do you live? How do you choose to prioritize between what's important and what's not important? These are all part of identifying what we could call skillful means. But I was reflecting on lifestyle choices about 6 months ago, maybe more. Tara and I decided to be vegan. We'll just be like vegan, ovo-vegan. We also have eggs, just in the house. But outside the house, anything goes. You know, and that seemed like kind of a cool thing. Like, yeah, we'll just go wild and come back and clean up, and then. But pretty soon, I found myself not even desiring that out in the world either. So. To feel the effect of eating purely vegan has been really, really interesting. I feel a lot better. I feel a lot clearer. It's fascinating. But I was reading about best practices with health. When you look toward creating habits, well, what are the best practices? Like, what are the best people in the world doing that create that outcome? And you may be familiar with something called the blue zones. Just very briefly, it's someone who decided to find the most long-lived, high-quality lifestyles on the planet. And they found there are some people in Japan, there's an island in Greece, there is somewhere in the mountains of South America, Loma Linda, California, with the Seventh-day Adventists, like they live really, really long. And so these are the characteristics that they found that they all had in common, regardless of their culture. One was their family. And their family was important beyond everything else. So a real commitment to family. Less smoking, some smoking, but a lot less than what most cultures would do. Either vegetarian or semi-vegetarian. And constant moderate physical activity as part of their lifestyle. So part of your lifestyle was walking and moving things. Having lots of social engagement, feeling connected to others. And the last one, beans. They all ate beans. So I was sharing that with Tara this afternoon. So I said, here are these characteristics, and they all ate beans. So Tara doesn't like beans. I said, you're in trouble here. So looking at what creates the most wholesome state that you can create, like what is the optimal environment for optimal health? It's a fascinating investigation, because the more energy you have, the more you'll be able to create and serve. So a little bit on long-term intentions, and then we'll close with a short meditation. There's a beautiful reading from Thomas Merton, a letter to a young activist, so someone who was really wanting to make social change. And he wrote this: "Do not depend on the hope of results. When you're doing the sort of work you have taken on, essentially an apostolic work, you may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and achieve no result at all, if not perhaps results opposite to what you expect. As you get used to this idea, you start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, on the truth of the work itself." And what Merton is speaking to is the practice of renouncing the fruit of your actions. It's one of the keys of karma yoga, to give without any expectation of return. And this can become a very, very powerful way of life. When you practice selfless service, or seva, as it's called, that intention to serve from a pure heart, without expectation, you begin to notice that there are experiences of selflessness, but you'll also begin to notice the selfishness. It's like the volume gets turned up on that mechanism. You begin to see the selfing, which is, we can consider a verb. When you self, you tighten around the story of who you are. So remembering your long-term goal, your reason for being, becomes a real guidepost to help you to come back to what's most important for you. There's a phrase that says, "Relax. Absolutely nothing is under control." I love that line. But when we look at karma, which is kind of like gravity, there's a lot that appears to be out of control, which you have no control over. But what you do have control over is how you hold it, how you relate to it. And that is the turning point. Deepak Chopra says, "Situations seem to happen to people, but in reality, they unfold from deeper karmic causes. The universe unfolds unto itself, bringing to bear any cause that needs to be included. Do not take this process personally." Or as he would say, do not take this process personally. The working out of cause and effect is eternal. You're part of the rising and falling that never ends. And only by riding the wave, you can ensure that the waves don't drown you. The ego takes everything personally, leaving no room for higher guidance or purpose. If you can realize that a cosmic plan is unfolding and appreciate the incredibly woven tapestry for what it is, a design of unparalleled marvel. So our life is very particular. It's unique. And yet we're separate waves on an ocean. We so easily believe we're a wave, separate from everything else, and we forget that we are the ocean as well. These waves are enormous. The ice ages that have come and gone. These mountains just to the west of us were once the tallest mountaintops on the planet. That's a big, big frame to be looking through. One of the most powerful things for me is when we look at our relationship to, I wish I had timed that better. Let me see if I can get the next one. And I say unto you, this has happened a number of times, but there's one time in particular that just gives me goosebumps every time. I was sitting with a woman who had 3 kids, I think, and was really struggling in her family and in her relationship. And part of her patterns of control were angering her husband, who would get very angry at her. She'd get afraid of his anger, and the kids were all shut down, and it was a mess. And she was feeling it all. And we began to start to unwind kind of the causes and conditions that would result in this experience. And part of her story was that she had lived in a very hostile household, an extremely unsafe household where there was verbal abuse, sometimes there was physical abuse, and everyone was terrified. And the more she examined how that pattern was in her and saw that it was inherited, that she inherited it from her primary caretakers. But when she did a role reversal with her parents and saw a very high likelihood that both her parents grew up in traumatic, unsafe households, she began to feel the chain of causality, of how far back that was handed down from generation to generation to generation. And this moment I'll never forget. Her eyes were red and, from crying hard and tears pouring down her face, and this intense look on her face. And she said, "This stops with me. I am not handing this on to my children. It stops with me." That's karma, and that's creating your karma. So reflecting on your karma, your destiny, it involves reflecting on your intention. What do you want? Where are you directing your ship? What's most important? It also includes examining your habits, not just the physical habits that give you energy or drain your energy, but your habitual thoughts, your habitual beliefs. Reflecting on the karmic outcome of those beliefs. Some beliefs are very powerful, very wholesome, some not so. And it can be helpful to reflect on long-term intention and also short-term, the possibility of creating more segments where you can really ask yourself, what's most important about this next meeting? How do I want to feel at the end? What do I want to create? And just sensing into that. And remembering perhaps that the practice is about remembering. In meditation, it's about remembering the here and now. Remembering the possibility of who you are as the observer, as the knower of your experience. And it's about remembering when you feel lost, what's most important to you, of how you can gather your attention back to the here and now. So let's close with a short reading and a little meditation. It's one of my favorite readings called Autobiography in 5 short chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. So you might take a few moments just to feel the breath, to feel the rain outside, the sound of the rain. And we'll close with one of those little wholesome states, sometimes called the offering of merit. I read recently a translation is the transferring of merit. Whatever merit, whatever you have accumulated this day that is of value to yourself and to others, offer it to yourself, to your path. And offer or transfer the fruit of your practice, the fruit of your actions, to those in your inner circle, offering it freely to them. To those you live with and work with. Offering it out in all directions to all beings without discrimination. And offering it back to yourself, back to this breath. And as you're ready, gently deepening the breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes.